Hello and welcome to another Canguro English Daily Digest. My name is Christian and today is Friday. Best day of the week. I have a lot of things that I want to talk about today, so I'm going to dive straight in. And I want to start by talking about a type of language that maybe you don't even consider is language, and that is sign language. Now I don't actually know any sign language at all, but I want to tell you a couple of really interesting facts about sign language. So the first one is that a lot of people think that sign language is universal, that there's one sign language basically, but just like other spoken languages, sign language has lots of different variations. So for example, American Sign Language is completely different from British Sign Language. And, in Africa, in each different country, in fact in Africa there's dozens and dozens of different types of sign language. So that's an interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize. And the second interesting thing is that just like normal languages, ordinary languages, spoken languages, sign language has accents. Maybe the way that you curl your finger or the position of the hand on the face, all of those things can be considered accents. So there's so much different variation and richness and beauty in sign language, the same as in spoken language. Now, why am I talking about sign language? Well, sign language, just like spoken language, if we study it, it can tell us really interesting things about language learning. And all of the reading that I do, all of the science that I'm interested in is to try and help you to understand how to learn languages better and to help me to understand too. So I want to talk about this study from 1995, which is the effects of age of acquisition on grammatical sensitivity. So basically, they studied people who had learned sign language from birth. So basically people who were born deaf. And then they studied people who learned sign languages when they were adults. So maybe they had to learn sign language because they were the parents of deaf children, or because they had an accident and they lost their hearing and they had to learn sign language. And what's really interesting about this study is that it showed that people who learnt sign languages from birth as children were much better at the grammar and the vocabulary and even noticing problems of grammar and vocabulary compared to adults who learnt sign language. And so what it tells us that sign language, just like spoken language, there's something happening. There's something happening that children are doing when they're learning languages, including sign languages, that adults are not doing. And we know, because I've been speaking about this in the previous classes, we know that it's not because of our brain power, because obviously adults have more brain power than a 6-month-old baby, right? So something happening. And it can tell us really interesting things about how you can learn a language better. Not learn language like a child, but understand what children are doing differently. So that tells us about that. Okay. Now, one of the reasons it seems that adults and children learn differently is that when adults try to learn a language, they scrutinize. They scrutinize the language. Scrutinize comes to us from Latin, from scrutare, and scrutinize means to inspect or investigate thoroughly, in great detail. And what's really funny is this probably came from the word for rubbish. We have this expression in English, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And it makes sense, right? You know, you have this sort of pile of trash in the streets of ancient Rome, and you have these people, you know, sifting through the trash looking for treasure. They are scrutinizing that trash, looking for little nuggets. And so that's a difference between adults and children. Adults scrutinize the language. But what if we sort of didn't scrutinize so much? What if we tried to absorb language in a more kind of passive way? And so there's some really interesting research about that. So now I spoke about this before. Okay, this was TV or not TV, the impact of subtitling on English skills. And they showed that in countries that have television programs which are dubbed, so basically they replace all of the voices and they put them in the native language, so they're speaking in Portuguese or Spanish or whatever. If they do that, compared to countries which have subtitles, so the program is in English and you have subtitles, they showed that it actually creates a massive difference in the level of English of that whole country. And it says here, where is it? We identify a subtitling effect equivalent to 16.9% of the overall TOEFL score. So that is very significant. 16.9% improvement in your TOEFL score just because you were absorbing that English. Now think about this. Now, there's still subtitles, so you're still reading, you're still processing in your native language, but there's something happening, right? There's some subconscious process. And this is a new study. This was published in Neuroimage. Where's the date? 27th of June 2018, so just a year ago. And it says, passive exposure to speech sounds modifies change detection brain response in adults. Okay, so what they did was, listen to this. Where is it? Okay, we exposed adult participants to Chinese lexical tones passively for 2 hours a day for 4 days. So these adults would sit and do stuff, and they would be in the background for 2 hours. They'd be listening to Chinese tones. And just ignore that, okay? And what they found was that when they did fMRI brain scans, they discovered that the people had much greater sensitivity to hearing the Chinese tones if they were exposed passively. So basically, again, there's something happening. You're not really paying attention. It's subconscious, it's passive, but it has an effect on the brain, right? And this gets back to, well, the work of oh my God, what's her name? Alyssa Newport and her theory about less is more. And here I have a preprint of a scientific article from Ben Ambridge from the University of Liverpool. And basically he showed that children don't learn language by scrutinizing it. Okay, what they do is they store examples and they compare examples. So I'm going to talk about this in more detail in the next Daily Digest, but something to think about for the weekend is just getting in some passive English, okay? Reading, listening. Remember, there's no substitute for just being immersed in the language. I hope you enjoyed today's Daily Digest. I'm Christian, and I'll see you in class.